Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The gentle hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the Newman penthouse, a stark contrast to the storm of silence brewing between its two occupants. Nick had been trying for days, weeks really, to pinpoint the exact moment the distance had begun to stretch between him and Sharon, a vast, cold tundra where their easy intimacy used to reside. He'd chalked it up to the lingering stress of their tumultuous lives, the ever-present shadow of his family's corporate wars, the ghost of past betrayals that never fully seemed to leave any room in Genoa City. He'd suggested a quiet dinner, just the two of them, a deliberate attempt to bridge the gap, to reconnect with the woman who had, against all odds, become his sanctuary once more. She had agreed, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a careful, practiced expression that didn't quite mask the profound unease lurking just beneath the surface. She was distant throughout the meal, pushing her food around the plate, her laughter at his jokes a beat too late and a note too high. He'd asked if she was feeling all right, if something was wrong at the clinic, and she had waved him off with a brittle assurance that everything was fine, she was just tired. But Nick knew Sharon. He knew the landscape of her face better than he knew his own, and he saw the telltale signs of a soul wrestling with a profound secret. It was in the way she couldn't quite meet his gaze for more than a second, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, the almost imperceptible hesitation before she answered any question that ventured too close to the personal. He let it go for a while, choosing to fill the silence with chatter about his brother Adam's latest scheme and his niece Katie's school play, hoping the normalcy of it all would draw her out. But the wall remained solid and high, and with every passing moment, Nick felt a cold dread beginning to coil in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't just fatigue or a bad day. This was something fundamental, something that threatened the very foundation they had so painstakingly rebuilt. Later, as Sharon was clearing the dishes, her phone, left face up on the kitchen counter, lit up with a notification. It was a text message, the preview line visible from where Nick stood. He wasn't intentionally snooping. His eyes simply drifted to the sudden light. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, a Dr. Evans, but it was the fragment of the message that froze the blood in his veins. Regarding the final adoption paperwork for Faith's biological sibling. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Faith's biological sibling. The words made no sense, yet they carried a chilling, undeniable weight. Faith was their daughter, hers and his, a product of a youthful passion and a subsequent kidnapping that had bonded them for life. What sibling? Sharon, sensing his sudden stillness, turned and followed his gaze to the phone. Her face already pale, drained of all remaining color, a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She moved quickly, snatching the device as if it were a live grenade. "Nick, it's nothing," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "Just a wrong number, some mix-up at the clinic." But the lie was so flimsy, so transparent, it was almost an insult. "A mix-up?" Nick repeated, his own voice dangerously low. "A mix-up about our daughter having a biological sibling? Sharon, what the hell is that? Who is Dr. Evans?" He took a step toward her, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, fearful rhythm. She backed away, clutching the phone to her chest as if it were a shield. "Please, Nick, just drop it. It's a private matter. A patient confidentiality thing. You don't understand." But he was beginning to understand, or at least, the horrifying shape of the truth was starting to form in the fog of her deception. "A patient? This is about Faith. That makes it my business. Our business. Now tell me what is going on." The command was sharp, laced with a fear he could no longer contain. He saw the internal war in her eyes, the desperate desire to keep the secret warring with the knowledge that the dam was about to break. The breakdown was not explosive but quiet and devastating. A slow, painful unraveling. Under the relentless pressure of his questions, her defenses crumbled. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and hopeless. She led him to the sofa, her body seeming to fold in on itself, and she began to speak in a broken whisper. She took him back, years back, to a time when they were not together. A lonely, vulnerable period after one of their many painful separations. She spoke of a brief, reckless encounter, a moment of weakness born from heartache and a desperate need to feel something other than the profound emptiness of losing him. It was a one-time thing, she insisted, a terrible mistake she had buried deep in the recesses of her memory, a secret she had sworn she would take to her grave. And then she discovered she was pregnant. The world stopped for Nick. The air left his lungs. He could only stare at her, his mind refusing to process the words. Pregnant. She continued, the story pouring out of her now in a tormented flood. She had been terrified, ashamed, convinced it would destroy any chance of them ever finding their way back to each other. So she had made a choice. She had hidden the pregnancy, a feat of immense logistical and emotional duress, and when the child was born, she had arranged a private, closed adoption. She had given the baby away. A child. His child. Their child's sibling. She had given it away and had never spoken of it, had sealed the chapter shut and built a life with him on top of that buried secret. I did it for us, Nick, she wept, her voice cracking. I did it to protect what we had. I couldn't lose you again. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, a physical pressure in the room. Nick stood up, moving away from her as if from something toxic. He paced, running a hand through his hair, his mind a chaotic jumble of images. Sharon pregnant with a child he never knew, giving birth alone, making a decision that would alter countless lives without his knowledge, his consent, his support. The betrayal was so vast, so multidimensional, he couldn't find its edges. It wasn't just the infidelity, a painful sting in its own right. It was the years of lies. It was the existence of a living, breathing human being, his flesh and blood, who had been given away like an unwanted secret. It was the fact that Faith had a brother or a sister out there in the world, a sibling she had every right to know, a connection that had been brutally severed by Sharon's deception. And it was the sheer, staggering selfishness of it all, the unilateral decision to rewrite the narrative of their lives based on a lie. For us? He finally spat out, the words like shards of glass. You did this for us? You lied to me for years, you gave away my child, and you have the audacity to say you did it for us. His voice rose, fueled by a torrent of pain and rage that was threatening to consume him. That child was mine, Sharon. Ours. You had no right. No right to make that choice alone. He was shouting now, all the control he usually prided himself on gone, evaporated in the heat of this unimaginable revelation. She flinched, shrinking back into the cushions, her tears falling faster. I was scared. I was alone. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to come to me, he roared, slamming his fist down on the marble countertop, the sharp crack echoing through the penthouse. That's what people who love each other do. They face things together. You didn't trust me, Sharon. You never have. You decided I wasn't strong enough or good enough to handle the truth. You decided our entire future was going to be built on this foundational lie. The argument escalated, a vicious cycle of accusation and desperate justification. He called her a liar, a coward. She pleaded for understanding, for a chance to explain the context of her fear and desperation. But Nick was beyond hearing context. All he could see was the lie, a cancer that had been growing in the heart of their relationship for years. He advanced toward her, his body trembling with the force of his emotions, his finger jabbing in her direction as he listed his grievances, each one a fresh wound. Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea? That is a person out there, Sharon. A Newman. My son or my daughter. And Faith, my God, Faith. How could you keep this from her? In her distress, Sharon stood her ground, stepping closer to him, her own voice rising to match his, a frantic attempt to make him see, to make him understand the impossible position she had been in. You don't get to judge me, Nick. You have no idea what it was like. You were off playing hero with Victor, you were with other women. You weren't there. It was the wrong thing to say. It was a deflection, an attempt to shift the blame, and it ignited the last of his restraint. As she stepped into his space, her face contorted in angry grief, he reacted. It wasn't a thought. It was a raw, primal reflex born of shattered trust and overwhelming pain. His open hand connected with her cheek with a sharp, sickening crack. The sound seemed to hang in the air, a punctuation mark to their chaos. For a moment there was absolute, deafening silence. The shock was instantaneous and mutual. Nick stared at his own hand as if it belonged to a stranger, the stinging sensation in his palm a horrifying confirmation of what he had done. Sharon's hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide with a pain that had nothing to do with the physical sting. They were windows into a soul that had just been profoundly violated in a new and terrifying way. The rage in Nick's eyes evaporated, replaced by a dawning gut-wrenching horror. He had never, ever raised a hand to a woman. It was a line he had sworn he would never cross, a fundamental tenet of his character. And in one uncontrollable moment, he had obliterated it. "Sharon," he whispered, his voice a broken plea. "My God. I'm sorry." But the words were meaningless, ash in his mouth. Sharon didn't speak. A single fresh tear traced a path through the redness blooming on her cheek. She looked at him not with anger now, but with a deep, bottomless sorrow and something else, a final chilling clarity. Without a word, she turned and walked away from him, her steps slow and deliberate. She picked up her purse from the table near the door, opened it and walked out. The soft click of the latch was more final than any slammed door could ever be. Nick stood alone in the devastating quiet of the penthouse, the ghost of the slap still lingering in the air. The weight of what had just transpired crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He had discovered a betrayal of unimaginable proportions, a secret that had fractured his past, present, and future. And in his response, he had become a man he did not recognize, a man who could strike the woman he loved. The two truths existed side by side, a toxic cocktail of victim and perpetrator. He was both the wronged party, reeling from a years-long deception, and the aggressor who had crossed a line from which there was no return. He sank to his knees, the image of Sharon's shocked and wounded face seared into his mind. The secret child was a tragedy, a shadow that would now forever loom over their lives. But the slap was a different kind of catastrophe. It was an act that had just redefined them, that had introduced a violence into their story where none had existed before. He had come into the evening seeking to close a distance, and he had instead created a chasm that felt, for the first time in all their turbulent history, truly and utterly impassable. The path forward was shrouded in darkness, the spoilers for their future now written in the language of a shared, profound shame and a pain so deep it threatened to swallow them both whole. The fight was over, but the real devastation was only just beginning. Nick had always believed that the worst shocks were behind him. Life in Genoa City had never been simple, but he had learned to navigate betrayals, concealed motives, and tragic turns with a resilience that both impressed and exhausted those closest to him. Yet on the afternoon he discovered the truth about Sharon's secret stepchild, an astonishing revelation hidden so deeply it seemed impossible it had been overlooked. He felt a familiar but long-dormant tremor inside him, the sense that the very ground beneath his feet had shifted. What unsettled him most was not merely the secret itself but the realization that Sharon, someone he had trusted across years of rupture and reconciliation, had once again entangled herself in deception. It was not the magnitude of the secret, but the intimacy of what she had concealed that inflamed him. Even before he confronted her, he felt the simmer of betrayal rise like heat in his chest. For Sharon, the weight of her decision had grown heavier with each passing week. She had convinced herself that she had good reasons, compassion, emotional protection, perhaps even fear, to conceal the existence of the child she had effectively acted as a stepmother to years ago, in a chapter of her life she desperately wished could remain buried. The child was not biologically hers, nor had she formally adopted them, but her bond with them had been meaningful, formative, and profound. And it had ended in pain that she had refused to reopen. But secrets, especially in Genoa City, rarely stay dormant forever. When a stray piece of paperwork emerged and made its way to Nick, Sharon knew the fragile boundary between truth and silence would soon rupture. Even so, she did not anticipate the depth of Nick's fury, nor the instinctive violence that would spill from him in a moment that neither of them would ever forget. When Nick arrived at her doorstep, his expression was nothing like the thoughtful, conflicted gaze she had come to know over the years. There was no trace of softness, no lingering affection flickering behind his eyes. Instead, they were storm-cloud dark, almost unrecognizable, as though every disappointment he had ever endured with her had suddenly condensed into one overwhelming burst. Sharon opened the door with cautious optimism, hoping to mitigate his response with calm reasoning. But the moment he thrust the paperwork toward her, the proof of her secret, she felt her breath catch. She attempted to speak, to soothe the tension, but her voice sounded faint even to her own ears. Nick demanded answers, not in the measured tone he prided himself on but in a clipped, volatile cadence that revealed his breaking point. His anger escalated quickly, fueled by memories of past lies, past manipulations, past emotional wounds that had never fully healed. In Nick's mind, this latest deception felt like the final entry in a long ledger of betrayals. He had forgiven Sharon for so much. Her mental health struggles, her impulsive decisions, the time she had concealed critical information and jeopardized their family's stability. But this secret stepchild, felt like both a personal betrayal and a moral affront. He could not comprehend why she would hide something so consequential, nor why she had not trusted him enough to confide in him. His voice rose as he demanded an explanation, and when Sharon tried to step toward him, pleading for calm, the fragile tether holding his composure snapped. The moment his hand struck her cheek, the room seemed to freeze. Sharon's eyes widened in disbelief, not simply from the sting of the physical impact but from shock at the man standing before her. Nick recoiled instantly as though stunned by his own action, yet the damage had already been done. The slap echoed between them like a physical manifestation of every dormant conflict the two had ever endured. Sharon pressed a hand to her cheek, slowly, methodically, as if verifying that the moment was real. For a long stretch of silence, they simply stared at one another, both breathing hard, both grappling with an abrupt shift in their dynamic that neither had expected nor wanted. Nick's shame crashed over him almost immediately. He had acted instinctively, fueled by rage, wounded pride, and accumulated frustration, and now he confronted the grim reality of what he had done. Violence was not a part of who he believed himself to be. He thought of himself as protective, principled, morally grounded. But the image of Sharon, eyes shining with tears and disbelief, confronted him with a truth he could not deny. He had crossed a line that he had once vowed never to cross. Desperate to speak, he tried to articulate an apology, but Sharon lifted her hand, stopping him with a gesture both firm and trembling. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was measured but thick with emotion. She told him that the slap had not merely broken her trust, it had fractured a piece of her spirit that she had only recently begun to repair. As Sharon continued, Nick found himself sinking into a heavy, suffocating guilt. She described the secret child, explaining the circumstances that had led her to take the role of a caretaker all those years ago. She spoke about the trauma surrounding that period of her life, trauma she had feared revisiting even within the safety of their relationship. Her reluctance to reveal the truth was rooted not in deceit, but in old pain she had never fully processed. Sharon confessed that she had been wrong to keep the secret from him, but insisted that the decision had not been born from manipulation or malice. It was born from fear of reopening wounds, fear of destabilizing what little peace she had managed to reclaim, fear of judgment from the one person she had hoped would understand. Nick listened, his anger dissipating with each word, replaced by a crushing remorse. But his remorse could not erase the act of violence that had already occurred. Sharon, through tears, said that trust was not only about telling the truth, it was also about feeling safe. And in that moment, with the sting still lingering on her cheek, she admitted she did not feel safe with him. Her confession struck Nick as hard as any slap could have. He felt tears prick his own eyes, a rare display of vulnerability he could not contain. He insisted he would never hurt her again, that the moment had been an aberration, a lapse in emotional control he deeply regretted. But Sharon, though she appreciated the sentiment, could not bring herself to accept the apology, not yet. The aftermath unfolded slowly, painfully, as both wrestled with the enormity of the moment. Nick stepped back, physically and emotionally, as though retreating from his own capacity for harm. Sharon sat on the edge of the couch, shoulders curved inward, cradling the emotional wound more closely than the physical one. Both understood that the path ahead was complicated, perhaps irreparably altered. Nick contemplated whether he should leave, whether his presence now intensified her distress. The internal battle was evident in his posture, in the tremor beneath his voice. Sharon eventually asked him to go, her tone still calm but laced with raw vulnerability. She needed space to process what had happened, to reclaim control over her emotions, and to decide whether the relationship could recover. Nick's departure was slow, hesitant, as though each step toward the door felt like relinquishing a part of his identity. When the door finally closed behind him, Sharon exhaled a long, trembling breath and allowed herself to cry in earnest. The tears were not merely for the slap, but for the years of complicated history, the entanglement of love and pain, trust and betrayal, that defined her relationship with Nick. She recognized that healing, if it was possible, would require distance, clarity, and a deep examination of her own patterns as well as his. Sharon was no stranger to emotional turmoil, but this moment felt different, heavier, more defining. And she knew that going forward, she could no longer allow herself to excuse or rationalize behaviors that violated her boundaries. Meanwhile, Nick returned home in a state of profound self-reproach. He replayed the moment again and again, unable to reconcile his action with the person he believed himself to be. He knew that the people in Genoa City, his family, his friends, would be horrified if they learned what he had done. The weight of potential judgment did not frighten him nearly as much as the knowledge that he had betrayed his own moral compass. He spent the night pacing, reflecting, and confronting the darker parts of himself that had surfaced in a moment of unrestrained anger. By morning, he realized that repairing what had been broken would require humility, patience, and perhaps even acceptance that Sharon might choose not to forgive him. In the days that followed, whispers about tension between them began circulating through town, though neither confirmed the truth. Sharon retreated into her routines with an almost clinical detachment, avoiding unnecessary interactions, and refusing to elaborate on the source of her emotional withdrawal. Nick similarly maintained his privacy, pouring himself into work and family obligations while contemplating how to approach Sharon without intruding upon her need for space. Though the two did not speak directly, their mutual struggle was evident to those who knew them best. Yet even their closest confidants sensed that something unusually grave had transpired, something beyond the typical turbulence that often characterized their relationship. Eventually, when tensions had cooled slightly, Nick requested a meeting through a neutral intermediary. Sharon agreed, but reluctantly, insisting it be in a public place to ensure emotional safety and maintain clear boundaries. Their reunion was measured, cautious, and fraught with unspoken tension. Nick apologized again, this time more coherently, more earnestly, and acknowledged that nothing he said could undo the harm. Sharon listened with quiet dignity, allowing him to speak without interruption. She explained that forgiveness, if it came, would require time and genuine effort, not only from him but also from herself. She expressed that the secret of the stepchild was intertwined with her own unresolved trauma, and she regretted not trusting him with the truth, but she also emphasized that his reaction had compounded her fears rather than alleviating them. The conversation did not end with reconciliation, nor did it conclude with absolute separation. Instead, it marked the beginning of a tentative, carefully paced process of reassessment. Both recognized the complexities of their shared history and the depth of the emotional challenges they now faced. Sharon, though wounded, understood that healing required confronting her past honestly and openly. Nick, deeply remorseful, understood that he must prove through consistent action, not words, that he was capable of growth and emotional restraint. Their future remained uncertain, but one thing had become unmistakably clear. The incident had irrevocably altered the foundation of their relationship, compelling them both to confront their vulnerabilities with a seriousness that could no longer be postponed. As time passed, Sharon gradually explored the emotional layers surrounding the secret child, acknowledging the ways in which fear had governed her choices. She began to seek guidance, counsel, and support, recognizing that the only way to move forward constructively was to address the root of her silence. Nick, for his part, began taking deliberate steps toward introspection, understanding that his anger had been fueled not only by Sharon's secrecy but also by unresolved issues from his own past. Both understood that while their paths remained intertwined, they would have to move cautiously, deliberately, and respectfully if they wished to rebuild trust. In the end, the future of their relationship remained open, not predetermined. The slap became a turning point, painful, jarring, but ultimately transformative, enforcing each of them to confront deeper truths about themselves and about each other. Whether they would one day reconcile or choose separate paths, the moment served as a potent reminder of the fragility of trust and the profound responsibility that comes with loving someone through their flaws, their secrets, and their humanity.